Hey y'all, I'm Gracie and this is Lab 1. Charge cannot be created or destroyed, and because of this, objects can transfer charge through contact or by simply being near another object. In this case, pieces of tape were used to transfer charges through contact. Through a series of experiments, the tape is found to have a positive charge. Due to the repulsive nature of two assumed equally charged tapes, one of them can actually float above the other. This allows the total excess positive charge to be calculated, because the magnitude of gravitational force must be equal to the magnitude of electric force if one tape is floating above another, and the momentum of that tape is not changing. Finally, the point charge method used to calculate the excess positive charge was modeled in Python to show how gravitational and electric force tie into calculating the excess positive charge. Determining charge of tape. I noticed that the U-tape was attracted to my hand. From that, I concluded that the U-tape is actually charged. Next, I brought two U-tapes close to each other and noticed they were repelled, so I know that they had the same charge. I also noticed that the U-tape was attracted to a neutral object, once again showing that it had a charge. Then finally, the U-tape is positively charged because it is attracted to a negatively charged pen. Next, I calculated the excess charge. The objects in the surroundings that exert mainly vertical forces on the floating portion of tape B are the electric force from tape A and the gravitational force from the Earth. This is depicted in the free body diagram, but first, it's assumed that both tape A and tape B have the same charge. It's also assumed that these tapes are point charges with charge concentrated at the center of the tapes, because in reality, all the charges on tape A interact with all the charges on tape B. Finally, it's assumed gravitational force and electric force are the only forces acting on tape B, and forces like air resistance are ignored. This allows us to depict the force from tape A to be upwards and the force of gravity to be depicted pointing downwards, and that they have the same magnitude, which allows tape B to float. Next, we have the length of the tape, the width of the tape, the mass of the tape, and the distance between the floating tapes. Finally, we have a chart showing how I actually calculated the excess positive charge. First, we have to calculate the magnitude of gravitational force. Next, from our assumptions that we made previously and the free body diagram, we know that magnitude of gravitational force and the magnitude of electric force are equal. Next, we have this equation, which I rearranged to calculate the charge of tape B, which is 1.221 times 10 to the negative 7th coulombs. Next, I calculated the deficiency of electrons, and we know there's a deficiency of electrons because the tape is positively charged. I calculated the number of atoms using the length of the tape times the width of the tape divided by the length scale of an atom. And finally, the ratio of electrons to atom is 1.70178 times 10 to the negative 6th. Next, we have our coding in Python. I coded it so that the blue sphere is tape B and the orange sphere is tape A. Using the same assumptions that we made in the physical experiment, I was able to determine that the magnitude of electric force is pointing in this direction and the magnitude of gravitational force is pointing in this direction. We know that they're going to be equal in magnitude, and that allows us to calculate the charge of tape B. And if you notice down here, the printed values are the same as the previously calculated values from the physical experiment. To conclude, the conservation of charge allows charge to be transferred between objects. The charge of the tape is positive. Assuming the only forces are electric and gravitational, the tapes have the same charge, and the tapes are point charges with charge concentrated at the center. The excess positive charge of tape B is 1.221 times 10 to the negative 7th coulombs. The same assumptions were made in the Python model to calculate excess positive charge of tape B. Just as an aside, you don't want to handle your tapes too much, or the charges from those tapes would be transferred into your hand or another object. Also, if electrons had positive charges and protons had negative charges, the only change in observation would be the charges of everything. The tape would be negatively charged, the pen would be positively charged, neutral objects would still be neutral.